Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. We go to the next talk in this collection. This is chapter 4, called Precepts, and this is back in the winter retreat of 1988 here at Amaravati. Precepts. Tonight is the new moon, and so today we reaffirmed our commitment to Sila, the Patimokkha for the bhikkhus, the 10 precepts for the nuns, the 8 precepts for the anigarikas. In this reaffirming of our commitment, we can take these 8 precepts to a refined level of interpretation. So, with the first precept, Panatipata Viratmani, to refrain from killing other creatures. Even though none of us may be prone to murder or physical violence, it's important to make it clear in our mind that our intention in this life is not even to harm others deliberately. The second precept, Adinadana Viratmani, is not just to refrain from stealing, but to respect the property of others, not to disturb or misuse that which belongs to others. It's a way of making that very definite in our consciousness. Abrahmacharya Viratmani, the third precept, is the vow of celibacy. At this time, again this is 1988, at this time there's much concern about AIDS and venereal diseases. A total misuse of sexuality has developed over the past few decades, whereby people have been completely irresponsible and sought pleasure from sexual activities without regard for the consequences. The result is that now we have moral dilemmas about abortion and about the various diseases and problems which arise and how to solve them. What should we do? Try to promote the use of condoms and all kinds of prophylactic measures so that people can do everything they want to without having to restrain themselves? Or promote pills and devices to prevent pregnancy so that no one will have to choose between having an abortion or having a baby? What is never even mentioned in all this is any kind of moral position. It seems to be something that you just don't mention. Celibacy is never even considered as a possible way of life. But when we really consider our life as human beings, there's a more skillful way to live. We can take on responsibility for our existence and refrain from involving others, or even exploiting our own bodies for the pursuit of that kind of pleasure. To undertake celibacy is a rather ennobling precept. It lifts us up. To be celibate is a potential, a possibility for developing meditation through the restraint necessary for the realization of truth. Celibacy is something one has to take on for oneself. It's not something that can be forced. That would not be chastity anymore, it would be tyranny. It has to be something that we choose, something we rise up to as individual beings, not an imposition on us. We don't want to go back to a puritanical position of thou shalt not, and threaten people with 84,000 eons in fiery hells, burning in absolute pain for any kind of sexual enjoyment. We're not trying to bring fear into the mind or to intimidate, rather to encourage what is noble and beautiful in our humanity. I assume that you're capable of motivating yourselves, and so I present this opportunity for practice. Sometimes people can have very low opinions of themselves, which are not really true. Maybe they've never had an opportunity to motivate themselves, or never felt that anyone trusted them enough to do so. We're trying to bring that kind of value, that kind of beauty into our monastic life, so that monasticism is something that is beautiful in the beginning, beautiful in the middle, and beautiful in the end, and not a kind of imposed tyranny or a forced march. So these reflections on the precepts and the the 8 precepts as a sort of basic format for renunciate life and for monastic training that is more refined in terms of the nuns' precepts and the monks' precepts. But the 8 precepts forms the essential framework for monastic living. In particular, these reflections on celibacy, one of the things I like to highlight is that when the Buddha was considering the establishing of the 8 precepts as a very significant sutta, it's a few places in the teachings where the Buddha speaks about this, but a particular teaching called the Uposatha Sutta. Uposatha is a name for the lunar observance days. And the Buddha is reflecting on what would be a suitable and skillful pattern of practice, or a format for practice for the lay community. And roughly speaking, in the sutta, what he says is that if you take the natural conduct of an enlightened being, then that can be a model, can be a training framework for the lay community. So in that sutta he says, all their lives, from the time of enlightenment until the passing away of the body, an enlightened being, an arahant, never deliberately takes life. Wouldn't it be a useful thing, a good thing for the lay community, one day a week on these moon days, to undertake that same standard of conduct, and then they will be living as the arahants do, and that will be for their long-lasting welfare and happiness. And so too with adina dana, and not taking what is not given, and then celibacy, abrahmacharya, musawada, and through all of the 8 precepts that people are familiar with. So that he's modeling the formalization of the 8 precepts on the natural conduct of the enlightened mind. So that if you look at the life of an arahant, their conduct, then they will never kill anything. They can't tell a lie. They will never steal anything. They're uninterested in any kind of sexual activity. They have a fewness of needs and so forth. And so that I feel that's a very, very significant reflection for us on the precepts, and particularly not just the moral precepts, the ones about killing, stealing, lying, and sexual misconduct and intoxicants, but also what are called the renunciate precepts. So that when we speak about the 8 precepts, some of them are what they call moral precepts, or the natural sila, and then the others are prescribed, or that they are forms of conduct that are not particularly moral issues, but are skillful forms of training. So like eating supper is not immoral. It's not something that is intrinsically damaging or painful, whereas killing another living being is intrinsically damaging and karmically obstructive. But the renunciate precepts are like not eating in the evening, not using entertainment, beautification, and adornment, having a simple sleeping place. Those are all what we call renunciate precepts. And then also the 3rd precept becoming that of celibacy. That's a renunciate precept. So that I feel it's very helpful to consider it in that way. And so what we're doing with the keeping of the precepts and adopting that behavior is that you're drawing upon that dimension of your own being, that in you which is incapable of lying, that in you which is completely respectful of the lives of other beings, that in you which is totally uninterested in being intoxicated or sort of switched off or having a distorted consciousness, that in you which is completely uninterested in any kind of sexual activity. So you're drawing upon that quality of inner fullness. You're drawing upon your own sort of nobility, what's called guna dhamma, your own goodness. And that is, by the methodology is that by adopting the behavior, by taking on the form of the precept, then you're being encouraged to draw upon what is, part of your own nature. And then, as the Buddha says, that by living in that way, that'll be for your long-lasting welfare and happiness. By living in that way, by consciously refraining from lying, then you experience the pleasant results of not lying or not engaging in sexual activity, not stealing or not harming, living simply and in a restrained way. And then having seen the beneficial, simplifying results of that, then that speaks for itself. That helps to I would say, encourage that as a way to be living, to be acting and operating. So that I feel those are, important principles to consider, because we often think of precepts as in don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, or morality as a sort of thou shalt not, as Luang Por puts it from the King James version of the Bible and the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not, as a sort of patriarchal God forbidding from above. But rather than coming as a command from outside, you're listening to your own heart of hearts, your own love of the good, that guna Dhamma. There's an English word, synderesis, which is not very commonly used, which is probably nobody else here familiar. Synderesis is the love of the good, that which is makes goodness and nobility and respect and kindness. Makes that appealing or beautiful. It's an underused word. But I feel that's what this is referring to. So you're drawing upon that the synderesis of your own heart, and then strengthening that, encouraging that. Synderesis, Synderesis. Synderesis. I think it's from the Greek, but don't. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's from the Greek, but you can look it up. We need to take on that responsibility for ourselves, rather than turning it over to somebody else, expecting someone else to come along and enlighten us, or love us, or drive us, or scold us. The spiritual potential of each being here is to be recognized. We have that marvelous ability to rise up to things, rather than to sink down. Rising up isn't a willful force, it's the ability to go beyond the inertia or the habit tendencies of one's life towards something higher, learning how just to pay attention to the breath, or to be more patient, more forgiving, more kindly to oneself and others. All of this is the effort of rising up and meeting the occasion. This doesn't mean always having to succeed or prove oneself. It means rising up to meet a situation in a skillful way with mindfulness and wisdom. And this is a possibility for us. We don't have to be caught in the force of habit and lost in the realm of delusion. Also, I think that's a part of that, understanding that dynamic of the precepts. And it's a theme that Luang Por Sumedho would often emphasize, is that rather than the religion being a set of ideas that you have to believe in, or a set of commands that you're expected to obey, and many of us who grew up in more sort of authoritarian or sort of externally focused religious forms like Judeo-Christian conditioning of the West, that's a very strong presence in one's life, that you're told to believe this is true, you should believe it, or this is good, so that's what you should do, that's bad, that's what you shouldn't do. And so one's, spiritual guidance is very much coming from outside. The book, the holy book, the Bible or the Quran or the Talmud says this. The New Testament says this. The Bhagavad Gita. The Scripture tells us this is the right thing. This is the truth. This is the absolute fact. And you should believe this. This is true because the authority says so, or obeying a command or a rule, and so that it's very much encouraging a quality of personal responsibility and personal motivation, like Luang Por is saying here, rather than just following a system or following a form or obeying a command. You're developing that sense of self-motivation, that it's a a quality of self-reliance that's being developed. That, I came here because I wanted to come here. I wasn't sent here. I'm doing this because I want to do it. I see a value in it. I'm not just following along a pattern because I've somehow climbed aboard this train and I can't see any reason to get off. So I'm just sort of going along with this particular tradition or this particular form. But Luang Por would always encourage that sense of not just following along the habitual conditioned patterns of religious structures and traditions, but looking within and making sure that your motivation and your interest, the energy for your spiritual life is very much coming from within. Because if it's just a matter of obeying commands or instructions from outside, or using your, say, the scriptures or authority figures for your reference of what's true and what's not true, then you're always, say, at a distance from the source of liberation. That you're placing the reality and the authority of what is true and good and right outside, is being, say, set apart from our own life, our own mind, our own heart. And so very much the forest tradition, as Luang Por Sumedho, Luang Por Cha would explain things, it's a continual effort to look within yourself, that you are the solution to your problems. Even though you might have literally an Ajahn sitting up in a chair doing all the talking, and both Luang Por Cha and Luang Por Sumedho would continually point it back to yourself. Don't look at me, look at yourself. It's not up to me to fix you. I can help you to fix yourself, but you've got to do the fixing. It's not up to me. I don't have the ability to fix you or to help you or to change you. I can help you to help yourselves, but it's up to you to do the actual immediate work. With speech, musavada viratmani, the precept is to refrain from incorrect speech. How easy it is to get caught in self-view if we use I am, poor me, speech habits. Notice the way the Buddha used language. There is suffering. There is anger, greed, or delusion. This is an example of refraining from wrong speech. If we start reflecting in that way, it affects how we see things. In this community, we have a willingness to learn how to communicate and try to have a way of speaking which is clear and honest, but not demanding or deluding in any way. By contrast, in society, one tries to be clever in one's speech, witty, droll, and with an intelligent mind, one's speech habits can be quite cruel and unskillful. But we give that up and try to use speech as something beautiful and clear, without giving forth wrong views to others. Musavada viratmani is not just refraining from lies, but involves the intention to take on responsibility for speech. That whole function of our humanity is quite a miracle when you contemplate it, and yet we just take it for granted. We can use our speech for telling dirty jokes, cursing and swearing, gossiping, insulting and all kinds of mean, horrible and dishonest things. Or we can respect this rather marvelous gift we have and learn how to use it in a way that is beautiful, accurate, and kindly. To be accurate, musavada does just mean lying, but Luang Por, as with the other precepts, he's also expanding on them in terms of, say, like panatipata is not killing, but he's also expanding on that to not be harmful in any way, or adinadana, not just to refrain from stealing, but to respect the property of others. So with this precept about speech, musavada, that technically that just refers to refraining from lying, but he's using it to expand to the other forms of unskillful speech that we can get into. So gossiping, cursing, using abusive language, backbiting, idle chatter, sampapalapa. It's a very onomatopoeic. I won't spell that for you. You can look that one up as well. I don't think I can spell onomatopoeic properly. But it's the sound of the word gives you the sense of its meaning. Sampapalapa, all that blah 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 blah, kind of idle chatter that's filling the air with noise to entertain yourself and other people. Yes, so that he's expanding that Musavada and looking at the different dimensions of how speech can be quite destructive or divisive. And in this country, the British press in particular, you have journalists who can make witty and cutting put-downs and sort of slice people up with their words, are very highly paid and highly regarded skill, and so it's one of those things that within the society, being able to make kind of clever and critical, demeaning remarks is something that you get praised for, you get high marks for, and so that rather than using speech in that kind of a way to sort of have clever put-downs or to be making fun of people, to be teasing others, and even in the monastic environment, I mean, nobody here is working as a journalist, but we can still make kind of snarky, snide remarks, putting people down, criticizing each other, making kind of supposedly clever comments to make fun of somebody. But if you do that, in the same spirit of using the precepts, look at what it feels like when you've just done that. If you've spoken in a kind of a sharp-tongued way, or you've made fun of somebody, teased somebody, or criticized somebody behind their back, then what does it feel like in your own heart? How does that sit? And so, even though it might have been a certain relish, sort of a kind of pleasing quality of making some kind of clever put down, when you look at the after effects of that, you feel the results of it, you realize, ooh, it's got a sour taste to it. It really is it's painful, painful to the citta. So then the fifth one. Then Sura Miraya Majappamadadhana Viratmani, refraining from intoxicants. Think how fortunate we are that we don't have to drink, take drugs and shoot up heroin. That problem affects all levels of society. Men, women and children, all races, all classes are being caught in the grip of these addictive drugs. There are also cigarettes and alcohol, all harmful and deluding to the human mind. When we become clouded with drugs and drink, we can't be responsible for what we say. I remember that when I used to drink, it was so that I didn't have to be responsible for what I said. When intoxicated, you lose your sense of timidity and shame with regard to sexual conduct. You have a few drinks and suddenly a lot of inhibitions just drop away. I wasn't into murdering people, but I certainly had no hesitation about getting rid of annoying insects or other things that I didn't like. One could see how easily one's sense of moral propriety and commitment could disappear under drugs and drink. Nowadays you find young people prostituting themselves to get money to buy drink and drugs, even people 12 or 13 years old, those we used to call children. Then there are the renunciant precepts, those which simplify our lives, to refrain from eating after noon and from entertainment and self-adornment. For human beings, there's a whole realm of fun and entertainment available through eating, dancing, singing, games, movies, TV and shows. And this is before smartphones and the internet. That didn't exist in 1988. It wasn't even an idea, I don't think. Maybe a few intelligence services had computers that were hooked up with each other, but digital cameras, smartphones, and computers and the internet didn't really exist at that time. So that has come on since then, but it all falls into the same kind of category. Then there's sleep. There's the temptation to spend a great deal of time seeking comfort and sleep. These aren't immoral. I'm not saying that eating a dinner is an immoral activity, or dancing and singing come to that. But we're trying to restrain ourselves and refrain from opportunities to distract ourselves through sensory pleasures, so that we can observe and reflect. These are standards and precepts for reflection, and are not rules from God. They're not to be viewed as from the thou shalt not, quote-unquote, position. Each one of the precepts is a resolution, something we are taking on and not something God is imposing on us. So you rise up to these precepts and make a resolution, in order to have it in your minds when you're tempted to act on the impulses you might be experiencing. After all, most of us come from backgrounds which were quite indulgent, and where we were never really encouraged to restrain ourselves. Sila is an honorable and lovely opportunity we have as human beings. We choose to be moral. We're not being moral because we're afraid of being immoral. We choose to do this and rise up to that which is noble, good, kind, and generous. So any particular thoughts, questions? Yes, Roman. If you could get the microphone.
Ajahn, for me personally, there's no doubt that the Buddha and the Buddhas before him attained the highest spiritual goal, the highest realization, and the highest perfection. At the same time, I find inspiration also, example, in the Desert Fathers and some of the Christian Orthodox monasticism. And because you mentioned about celibacy, there's a book called Philokalia, which is an anthology, you know it, and
I know of it.
And it literally means the love of the good. And the undertitle of that book is The Holy Fathers of Sobriety. And they talk a lot about hesychia, which means stillness, stillness of the heart, stillness of thoughts. Meister Eckhart, Christian mystic, talks about the eternal now. He says there's something beyond God. They were going to excommunicate him, but he died before that could happen. And you have Teresa of Avila, who talks of the 7 castles, which can be thought of as the 7 jhanas or something like that. And so while there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the Buddha has discovered the ancient path, I still find it helpful to kind of expand the spiritual keyboard, just to have some more tools in one's tool set on the way. So I personally find it good that I can focus on the good qualities that all these saints, the communion of saints and sages have. I know that there's a big difference with regards to the highest goal, but as long as we can be aware of that and unwaveringly clear about the Buddha having attained the highest goal, then I personally find it very helpful to have kind of more of an inclusive approach to other religions. So would you agree with that, or would you like to say something to that?
Yeah, I tend to be a very eclectic kind of a person, and so like yourself, when you come across teachings of different spiritual traditions, there's often something there that rings very, very true. And I haven't read a lot about the Desert Fathers, but a little bit, and so many of the their teachings. Interestingly, the previous Archbishop of Canterbury, Dr. Rowan Williams, he was an expert on the Desert Fathers, and I did a day-long session with him at the Buddhist Society. Myself and a few other Buddhist teachers had like a Christian Buddhist dialogue with him. He, I think the most recent theologian that he quoted was something like about 11th or 12th century. And almost all the people he quoted were from the Desert Fathers, from the sort of 4th or 5th, 6th or 7th century, from that early period of Christian monasticism. And a lot of the things that they say is very akin to the forest tradition. And the chaplain, the former chaplain of the school that I went to, he was an Arabic scholar. He was a Church of England minister, but he was a scholar of Arabic, and also the Coptic church, Coptic Christianity, and he did a whole little book after meeting me and hearing about the Thai forest tradition. He did a whole little book on the Desert Fathers and the teachings of Ajahn Mun and the forest tradition, because he saw so many parallels, and he could read and write Arabic. He was very familiar with Coptic, original Coptic texts and such like. So he was very well informed about the Desert Fathers. With respect to Meister Eckhart, there is quite a number of translations of his works into English, but one of the most respected was done by Maurice Walsh, who was a dedicated Buddhist. He was a medieval German scholar by profession, and he was one of the early members of the English Sangha Trust. He became a monk here for his 80th. When he turned 80, Luang Por Sumedho gave him Upasampada, so he was a monk for 3 months here. And he translated Meister Eckhart into English because he felt he was the most Buddhist of the Christian mystics, and that medieval German, your texts are pretty much based around Christianity. So that and his translation is very highly respected and very reliable. So I do feel, there's an ancient saying which is, "Gold is where you find it." A kind of part of our folklore in this part of the world. I think actually it's an Irish expression originally. Gold is where you find it. And so that if you come across those kind of texts or those teachings, and this is, yes, that's right, that rings true, that makes sense, then fair enough, take it and use it. The Buddha doesn't have the monopoly on reality. So if a particular set of words or principles evoke a quality of inspiration or insight, then fine, take it and use it. Yeah, similarly, Luang Por Sumedho is extremely eclectic. In his bookshelves all had lots of Advaita Vedanta or kind of various different mystical traditions, people from different mystical traditions, and so it's I think it's up to one's own disposition. Some people find that they get very confused, or it makes them very filled with doubt, and it's quite agitating to have different religious expressions. Other people feel quite comfortable with it. Like on that day with Rowan Williams at the Buddhist Society, there were quite a few things that he said I've actually sort of woven into Dhamma talks. That I'd sort of borrowed his words that he used in terms of talking about the Desert Fathers and his own understanding. So one of the expressions he used was, to think of God as a thing in a universe of other things is to completely misunderstand the principle. So, and I've literally taken that, and probably some of you have heard me say that, to think of the Dhamma as a thing in the world of other things is to completely misunderstand it. I've literally taken his words and put Dhamma there instead of God in the phraseology, because I feel that works. It's a very accurate statement. One of the German mystics, I think it might have been Angelus Silesius, I forget. Anyway, one of the people that he quoted, he said that there was this principle, and forgive my bad German pronunciation, of ohne warum, there is no why. There is no why, and that is a sort of like a sort of Christian koan. If you ask him why did God do this, or why are we here, it's ohne warum. No, there is no why. Don't go to the why. That's not a beneficial track to go down, which is very much in accord with Buddhist principles of inquiry. You're not looking for conceptual answers or an idea that makes everything sort of right, but you're learning to let go of pinning down a causality into some sort of fixed and limited, action or event that is a cause of other things. So the things like that from that day, I picked up. Ooh, and actually, I was going to. I have the transcript of that day of conversations, and I was thinking of printing it up. I have to get permission from Dr. Williams to do it, and the Buddhist Society. But I was going to use the title "There Is No Why" as a title for that publication, because I thought, well, that fits both traditions very, very neatly. So I think that as I said, gold is where you find it, and if you find that those kind of resources, they speak to you, they're helpful, and they don't cause more complication or confusion, great, take it and use it. If it's more makes things more difficult or causes doubt and agitation or makes you argue with other people, get into conflicts, then see that, notice that. There's many Christian mystical teachings, particularly often the ones who are sort of on the edge of heresy, like Meister Eckhart, who conveniently died on the way to his trial or on the way to his execution, I forget which, but he conveniently popped off. But I think the quote that you said, you referred to, is he said, "The Godhead is as high above God as God is above humanity." And so he talked about that principle of the Godhead, and so in that area, the idea of personalizing God or thinking of ultimate reality in those sort of limited and sort of anthropomorphic terms, so like this sort of powerful being up in the sky with a long white beard that says "Thou shalt" and "shalt not." That's people like Meister Eckhart and other Christian mystics. They speak in a language which is pointing to a reality that is very, very far beyond that. That doesn't sort of limit the idea of that sort of ultimate principle in those very humanized forms or humanized terms. And that's I feel that's very much in accord with Buddha's teaching. In Thailand, Ajahn Buddhadasa was very active in helping the Christians to translate the Bible into Thai. He was a Buddhist teacher, but he would give lectures in a Jesuit seminary. He was invited to give lectures in a Jesuit seminary in Thailand. And that when the missionaries in Thailand first tried to translate the Bible into Thai, they were trying to avoid all Buddhist language, but it was ridiculous, because about 30 or 40% of Thai language comes from Pali terms and Sanskrit. So Ajahn Buddhadasa thought, well, this is ridiculous, this doesn't make any sense at all, let me help. And so he was quite instrumental in helping to put the Christian Bible into readable Thai, so that it's a sort of meaningful spiritual text. And it's a credit to the Thai Christians that they were happy for a Buddhist master to lend them a hand to put it into language that made sense for them as well as for non-Christian readers. So I think the mind, again, it depends on the disposition of the individual, but if we see that language and concepts, traditions, they can only be skillful means. I mean, I know that goes against the sort of spiritual traditions of, like, say, the Talmud or the Quran, that this is the word of the absolute, and that it can't be argued with, it can't be changed. But if you put that principle aside for the moment, I would say that any religious form, any structure, any tradition, any concept, it can only be a convenient fiction. It can only be a skillful means. It can't encapsulate the truth, and that if you hold it in that way, and then if a particular expression or a particular way of representing things speaks to you and says, "Oh yeah, that's right. Now that makes sense. Yes," then take it and use it. It can be a benefit, because it's these teachings, these principles are here for us as humans. And if they're there for us, we're not here for them. We're not here just to serve those teachings and to sort of preserve them or worship them, but they're there for us. So that it's if that actually has a beneficial impact on our life, then great, take it and use it. Yes, Venerable Attadasi.
Sorry, Ajahn. Just wondering if you remember the title of the book about the Desert Fathers and Ajahn Mun.
About the Desert Fathers and
Ajahn Mun.
I'd have to. The man who wrote it was called Father John Watson. I think he published it through a small Christian publishing house. I don't think I think I had a copy at Abhayagiri Monastery in California, but you might find it if you did a Google search for Father John Watson, Reverend John Watson, and Ajahn Mun, Desert Fathers. You might find it, but I wouldn't hold your breath. Yeah. But he'd never had much contact with Buddhism at all before he met me, and I had a difficult time at that particular school. So after I'd left, I had a sort of I'm never going to go back there again feeling. But then one of the people that I was at school with there, actually the younger brother of Brigitte Burnett, who used to be the retreat manager, I was at school with her brothers. And her brother was very, very sick with AIDS, and he came to visit here shortly before he died. And we got into conversation about the school, and I made some kind of caustic remark, some sort of clever put down about the school. And so I'm never going back there again, speaking of unskillful speech. And he said, well, actually now you say that, but there's this really interesting chaplain, the school chaplain. He's a Church of England minister, but he's a really interesting guy because he has these connections with the Coptic Church. He goes by the name of Father John. He wears a beard, and he's a theatre director. He's like a dramatist and a very skilled theatre director. So I think if you wrote to him, he'd be really interested to meet you. And I went, well, I don't know. But anyway, I kind of out of friendship for this fellow, Brigitte's brother Jonathan, I thought, okay, well I'll make contact. So I wrote to Father John, and he said, oh yes, please. Come and visit. And at that time, my parents still lived very close to the same village where the school was. And so if I was visiting my parents, it was easy to just go to the school. And so then over a few years, maybe 5 or 10 years, Father John would get me to go and visit the school whenever I could. And then we had many, many interesting dialogues. He was very helpful to Pope Shenouda, the Pope of the Coptic Church, was under house arrest for many years, and he was quite active in Amnesty International and these groups trying to get him released from house arrest and to sort of restore him to freedom and such like. So he's a very, very interesting fellow. And so out of that, then I started giving him some of our literature, and which he was impressed with. And he'd literally had almost no knowledge or contact with Buddhism before. So then reading some of our Dhamma books, and then particularly the biography of Ajahn Mun, and then he thought, this is like the Desert Fathers, but in a forest. And and they're eating sticky rice instead of locusts, and snakes and lizards. So, well, so they still eat lizards, and they're eating lizards in Thailand as well. So. But he was very struck by the parallels between the spirit of the forest tradition and the Desert Fathers. So, Reverend John Watson. Okay, so let's continue. So Luang Por continues speaking about the precepts and relating skillfully to them. Admittedly, worldly attractions remain strong, and it isn't part of my teaching to condemn them. I'm not against the worldly life, nor am I trying to raise monasticism up as something that everyone should be doing. One can live a very good, wholesome worldly life too. Wholesomeness is not just the prerogative of monks and nuns. Sometimes lay people think I'm a, quote, monk fanatic, unquote, because I emphasize the value of this way of life. But the attitude is one of reflection, rather than having an axe to grind or a position to take on anything. We aim to develop that reflective ability of the mind, and the particular conventions we find ourselves in are developed around that. This is what the Buddha's teaching is about. All the conventions of the Vinaya, monastic discipline, and Dhamma teachings are designed to help in that way. Some people say you can follow the teachings fully as a layperson, and this is not to be denied. But if monastics can't use the lifestyle which is deliberately established for Dhamma Vinaya, what makes them think they'll ever do it in any other form? This is what I want to get you to look at. Look at yourselves as wanting something that you don't have, or wanting to get away from what you have. Just watch that in yourself, that restlessness, discontent, and movement of your mind. Sometimes, of course, one doesn't want to give up the world yet. One still wants rebirth and happiness and worldly things. So that reminds me of the speaking of Christian mystics, the very famous statement of St. Augustine, which was, "O Lord, grant me purity, but not yet." I'm not sure if that's accurate, but it's something close to that. It's like, yes, I want purity, but can we negotiate? Just in a few years' time, I've got a few more defilements to nurture here. So. Oh Lord, grant me purity, but not yet. One still wants rebirth and happiness and worldly things. Fair enough. But I don't want you to go around lying to yourselves. If you want to have your own way, have rebirths and worldly happiness, that's your decision. But don't delude yourselves by thinking that you're doing something else. Because if you really understand the teaching of the Buddha, there's nowhere to go and nothing to do. This is the way it is. We're living a life that is for that kind of reflection. Then you can observe that desire to be somewhere else as a movement of your mind, to see that and recognize it for what it is. Whether you follow that desire or not is still up to you. Allow yourself to die to the moment. Investigate and observe how things are. Everything that arises ceases. In all, everything fits into that pattern. In this way, we can reflect on the mundane, day-to-day ordinariness of our lives. Since we monastics can't dance and sing, go to shows, pubs, football games, or restaurants, and follow the pleasures and distractions of the world, the ordinariness of our lives takes on more significance. If you're used to a high level of excitement, ordinary things are boring, and one is always aiming at some new thrill or experience. Monasticism is a boring lifestyle, just a routine. We're not aiming at having exciting things to do or distractions, because in meditation we're being aware of how things ordinarily are in consciousness. So we no longer try to find and follow the extraordinary. It's only through calming down and through restraint, not following restlessness, not being caught up in emotions, that we have a chance to realize the unconditioned. It's only when we can let go, calm down and reflect, that there's a realization of the ending of the conditioned realm, in which everything that arises ceases, and a realization of Nibbana. There's no way of realizing Nibbana by striving and trying to attain, achieve, and be caught up in the arising side. You have to let go of that. So what he means by the arising side, again, he's talking about the dependent origination, the habits of the mind grasping springtime, success, praise, gain, happiness, and wanting only those sort of positive, exciting, interesting, inspiring experiences. And then when it's the fading, winter, cold, dark, loss, criticism, failure, pain, the downward part of the cycle, then we're not interested in that. But what it is pointing to, and he says very briefly earlier on, don't delude yourselves by thinking that you're doing something else, because if you really understand the teaching of the Buddha, there's nowhere to go and nothing to do. So that can be a bit intimidating. Because, but can we negotiate here? Yes, I know there's nowhere to go and nothing to do, but not yet. that can be. But what it's pointing to is that the Dhamma is here and now. The Dhamma is the fundamental reality of things. And so if you are recognizing that the Dhamma is the fundamental reality of everything that you are, everything that's real, then what's there to gain or what's there to get by having any particular pattern of experience? What can be gained? What can be lost through any sensory event? There's nowhere to go and nothing to do. If the Dhamma is the reality of what we are, if that's an awakening to that inner quality, establishing that inner realization, what's to get rid of? What's to acquire? What's missing? And so that is, I would say, is a completely valid and an important insight, but it goes against extremely powerful conditioning of. But I've got things to do. I've got places to go. I've got responsibilities. I've got family. I've got my life. I've got my body. I've got my mind. I've got my personality. I've got my obligations. I've got my regrets. My list of things to do. And so that then even wholesome and noble and good qualities that we can be attracted to, as well as just romance, adventure, excitement, as Luang Por would often say, that's the task in a way of and why we use simplicity and making life as boring and as plain as possible, so that the mind can, in a sense, see between the cracks of the colourful and compelling, interesting and wonderful and terrible events of the sensory world, that the mind can see through the cracks. And that when we talk about realizing the unconditioned, the unborn, the unoriginated, the unconditioned, it's only through letting go of our fascination with the born, the formed, the conditioned, the created, that then the mind lets go and awakens to its own nature. If it's busy pursuing sense objects that we like or we dislike or have opinions about, or we create as being solid, self and other, then the mind misses the unconditioned, the unborn, that other dimension of being, because it doesn't grab the attention. As Luang Por would say, space is not interesting, silence is not interesting. It doesn't grab the attention, whereas forms, sounds, smells, taste, touch, the bright, the loud, and the mobile gets our attention. The subtle and the indistinct, the gaps between the molecules, the attention doesn't go there. The spaces between people, the silence between words doesn't get our attention. Our senses are geared towards the objects, and so that's what is in a way the task of our practice is getting to know that the power of that conditioning. And to be aware of that, to respect that, and to train the mind not to go with that, not to go out and to get lost in the colourful, loud and bright and mobile qualities of the sense world, but to cultivate that inner realization. And it's subtle. It's all. It's something that requires a lot of work. But that's one of the reasons why we keep the precepts and we have a very plain life. We all wear basically the same clothing. The monks have got generally the same color. The nuns have got the same color. The anagarics got the same color. All have the same haircut. None of us have to think, what am I going to do with my hair today? It's an easy one. It's just don't have to think about it. So that plainness and that uniformity is there to help the mind to not get drawn into the sense world. And even though we can get caught up in our loves and hates with each other, if we keep the precepts, then we're not physically harming anyone. We're not flirting with anyone or forming romantic relationships with anyone. We're not lying to anyone. So that even if we feel attraction or aversion or irritation or fear and anxiety, that by keeping the precepts, we're not creating any kind of emotionally charged karma around that. It's those feelings of love or hate or fear, attraction and aversion can arise, but because they're not being acted on, they're not being fed, and the say emotionally charged karma is not being created around them, then they're much more easy to be known, to be recognized, and to be understood, to be let go of. If we're following those, if we're lying to people, or we're flirting with each other, or we're killing things, then there's a lot more emotionally charged say karma being created. The resultant karma of all of that is extremely strong and has many resonances, and so then it's harder to keep a perspective on that. So when Luang Por is talking about practicing as a layperson, that's part of what he's talking about. Is that as a monastic, it's like a deliberately set up, sort of maximized simplicity. That's the idea of it. It might seem like my life was much more complicated as a monastic than it was. My life as a layperson was really simple. Now I'm in the robes. It's really complicated. This is the wrong way around. So we might have that feeling, but the kind of complications that we create in the monastery, I would say, generally are of a very different order, and so that it's much easier to gain a perspective on that, to sustain a clarity around that. And whereas the effort that Luang Por Sumedho is making here is not to put down lay life or even sensual pleasure, and that as part of our human conditioning, but just pointing out that if you are wanting to make choices and find gratification or satisfaction through activity, through what we see and hear and smell and taste and touch, fine, but don't pretend that it's anything special or exalted or liberating. It's just enjoying the sense world because you want to, like St. Augustine. Is grant me purity, but not yet. I'm ready to renounce the world almost. And just being honest with where we're at, that's an important thing. And that I feel that kind of say integrity, or being true to yourself and acknowledging where you're at, that's fair enough. And so for some people coming into the monastic life, it's a good fit. It works for a period of time, and it's very beneficial. After some time, then the shoe doesn't fit anymore, and so that it's not helpful. It's not working, and so that then you give it the best shot that you can. You do the best you can with it, but sometimes it just things shift, and that that way of living and relating doesn't do the job anymore. So it's fine to step out of it. I feel it's part of the Buddha's tradition of making it quite easy to leave the monastic life is an important principle, that as long as it's meaningful for you and valuable, then it works. If you're in it just kind of following an obligation or a duty, you're just doing it because of social pressure or inertia, just you're just sort of going along with it because of just habit, then it's not benefiting, and it's not benefiting you or the people around you. And so that sense of being ready to look and see how this is working for you as an individual is important, and that if it doesn't work anymore, then certainly you talk to your friends and your teachers and say what you're experiencing. But I feel that sense of not being trapped in the robe is really important, and that speaking with other Christian orders, that's one of the most destructive things in Christian monasteries, is somebody who really wants to leave but who can't, who's sort of stuck in the monastery. It's really it's painful for everyone around them. It has a very notable impact, and so I think it was very one of the most skillful things of the Buddha in setting up the monastic order, the Sangha, to be making it so you don't get imprisoned in it. Maybe I'll just read the last couple of paragraphs. The realization of letting go of what arises in the mind leads to witnessing the cessation of that which has arisen. Then there is the true peace of allowing things to be as they are. No longer are we somebody who has to get somewhere, do something, get rid of something, or change something. When we're caught in distracting ourselves with pleasures, we're somebody, and somebody who has to find happiness, have success, or become something. No matter how many excitements and pleasures I might experience, I have to have more than that. We're never content with the excitement and adventures of life. They just cause us to be caught up in that movement of having to have more and more, until we get burnt out. Then we go to the opposite extreme, because we're tired and worn out from all the excitement and stimulation, we break down, fall asleep, or get drugged or drunk. We want to not exist. We can only have so much excitement, and then we can't bear it anymore. To be excited continuously is a hell realm. In my sister's home in California, so his sister and brother-in-law, they lived very close to his parents in San Diego, so he would go and visit them every year for a few weeks. Now, my sister's home in California, they have all these television stations and cable relays. You can have 70 or so channels at your disposal all the time. People get into the habit of just switching channels if anything becomes the slightest bit boring or slightly uninteresting or unpleasant. They just switch to the next one. There's always a gunfight or a chorus line to zap you. It's a kind of hell realm. It's unpleasant to have a mind that has to be stimulated one moment after another. So, you see the loveliness of a life that is based on composure, moral restraint, nobility, generosity, kindness, and reflection on Dhamma. It's wonderful to be able to have the opportunity and the encouragement to contemplate your own existence and to train in a way that enables you to respect yourself. You can move towards being a contented and joyful being rather than a hungry, obsessed one. So wonderful reflections there from Luang Por. I feel that that sense of don't say that that we can experience when we talk about nothing to do, nowhere to go, wanting to be somebody or to have success and become something. To notice that if there is that kind of quailing in the heart, that's don't say that. It's really useful to notice that. What is it that is shrinking from that, and where's that coming from? And to notice that, because in my experience, that's very much coming from the habits of conceit and self-view, the asmimana, the I am, me and mine feeling, and that if that's really received and understood, then and let go of, then the Dhamma itself is far more apparent. That sense of that which is apparent here and now, timeless, that the ultimate reality of things, that the Dhamma which is unborn, unoriginated, uncreated, unformed, that is unimaginable, that presence of Dhamma is much more apparent, and so that even though it's difficult to get a mental image of what that might mean, that in the practice, when we notice that sort of quailing or but I want to be, I want to have, I am, to really know that, to feel that, and to let go of it, then when the mind lets go, what remains is brightness, clarity, spaciousness, and no sense of self. And that I would say that's in that moment the Dhamma is being realized, the Dhamma is being embodied, the mind is awakening to its own nature, the citta is really knowing its own nature, which is free of conceit, free of self-view, and in that moment there is the realization of Nibbana, that's perfect peacefulness and fulfillment right there. So I'll leave it at that for today.